I never thought much about high school after I graduated. Like most people, I had moved on, got a job, and built a life. But a recent class reunion brought back a flood of memories, some good, others uncomfortable. Those uncomfortable ones centered around how I acted towards some of my former classmates, especially the way I objectified some of the girls back then. It was never blatant harassment, more like immature comments and jokes that seemed harmless at the time. Looking back, I realized it wasn't harmless at all. I remember the way my friends and I would rate the girls in our class, ranking them based on looks and popularity. We never considered how those rankings might have affected them. It was all a joke to us. I cringe now thinking about the things I said and did. During the reunion, I saw some of those women again and felt a knot in my stomach. One of them, Sarah, was there. Back in school, we had a nickname for her that I won't repeat here. Seeing her now, realizing she's a person with a life and feelings, I was ashamed of who I used to be. This guilt had been gnawing at me since the reunion. I knew I had to do something. But how do you apologize for something like that, years later, without reopening old wounds? I didn't want to make things worse for them or make it about easing my conscience. I spent a few sleepless nights thinking it over, wondering what would be the right thing to do. Just sending a message felt insincere, but confronting them in person seemed intrusive. Then, I thought about writing letters. I could express my remorse without forcing an immediate reaction. It would give them space to process their feelings. But even that felt presumptuous. Would they want to hear from me at all? What if it just brought back bad memories they'd rather forget? I was caught in this loop of wanting to do the right thing, but fearing I'd just mess it up. Eventually, I decided to reach out to a mutual friend, Lisa, someone who had remained friends with many of our classmates. I figured she might have some insight. "Hey, Lisa," I texted, "can we meet up? I need some advice about something important." Her reply came quickly, setting up a coffee date for the next day. Meeting Lisa was nerve-wracking. Over coffee, I laid out everything, my guilt, my plan to make amends, and my worries about causing more harm. She listened quietly, sipping her cappuccino, and then said, "It's good you want to make things right, but you need to be prepared for any reaction. Not everyone will want to hear from you, and that's okay." Her words were both comforting and daunting. I knew she was right, but it didn't make the task any less intimidating. Walking away from that meeting, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I couldn't change the past, but I could take responsibility for it. As I started drafting those letters, I was filled with uncertainty. Would they even read them? Would they hate me for bringing it all back? I had to remind myself that the point wasn't to make myself feel better, but to offer a sincere apology. What would you have done in my place? I used to think I had a pretty decent life plan. At 28, I had a stable job in tech, a comfortable apartment, and a small but tight-knit group of friends. But beneath the surface, things weren't as together as they seemed. My mind was a tangled mess of guilt and social anxiety. It wasn't something I talked about much, not even with my closest friends. I kept it hidden, hoping it would just fade away with time. But I was wrong. The summer of 2025 was particularly hot, both in temperature and the pressure I felt. I worked at a tech company in the USA where innovation and speed were the currency. It's the kind of job where you either swim with the tide or get swept away. But my mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying past mistakes like a broken record, making it hard to focus on anything else. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through social media. It was my usual routine, a way to unwind, or, more accurately, to numb myself. That's when I stumbled upon an old photo from college, a time when things were simpler. But the photo wasn't the problem. It was the familiar faces in it, smiling and carefree, that triggered something deep inside me. Seeing those faces reminded me of decisions I made, actions I took that hurt people who once mattered to me. I had buried those memories, convinced myself they were in the past. But there they were, staring back at me, demanding to be acknowledged. It was like reopening an old wound that never quite healed. "Why now?" I muttered to myself, tossing my phone aside. I knew why, or at least I thought I did. I had been running on autopilot for so long, avoiding confrontation with my own mistakes. But you can only run for so long before you have to stop and face reality. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something about it. But what? Reaching out to those I wronged felt like reopening a can of worms. It could lead to professional fallout or make things even more complicated. The guilt was like a shadow, always lurking, and the anxiety was its companion, whispering worst-case scenarios in my ear. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I weighed my options. Living with this guilt was exhausting, but risking my professional life to make amends seemed reckless. Yet, the choice was mine alone. I could keep hiding, or I could take a step into the unknown and hope for the best. The air was thick with the heat of summer and the weight of my indecision. As the clock ticked past midnight, I knew I had to make a choice soon. The question was, should I risk everything to potentially make things right, or continue living in the comfort of my guilt? What would you have done? I turned to my side, pulling the covers tighter around me, trying to silence the internal voice that had become all too loud. The nights were always like this, filled with thoughts I couldn't escape and regrets I couldn't erase. In the quiet, my mind drifted back to the choices I made when I was younger, the same ones that now haunted me. Justifications from my past crept in like uninvited guests. You were young, I told myself. Everyone makes mistakes. It was the same tired refrain I'd relied on for years. But the truth was, these justifications no longer held water. They felt like cheap excuses, a way to shield myself from the accountability I desperately needed to face. I could recall specific incidents with alarming clarity. Moments I wished I could forget, but they were etched in my memory like permanent ink. I remembered the time I lied to a friend, convincing myself it was for their own good, only to watch the friendship crumble under the weight of my deceit. Or the time I cut corners at work, thinking no one would notice, only to find the repercussions echo through my career. Each incident was a reminder of the patterns I had denied for too long. The more I tried to push these memories away, the more vivid they became. They played out like scenes from a movie, each one reinforcing the realization that I was not the person I wanted to be. My heart raced with the acknowledgement that I couldn't continue down this path without confronting the past. Determined to break the cycle, I knew I had to face it all head-on. No more running. No more hiding behind excuses. It was time to take responsibility for my actions, to own up to my mistakes, and to seek redemption, whatever form that might take. It was a daunting task, but the alternative, living in perpetual regret, was no longer an option I could entertain. As the night wore on, a sense of resolve began to replace my earlier indecision. The fear of what might happen if I confronted these issues was overshadowed by the fear of what would happen if I didn't. I realized that change was necessary, not just for my sake, but for those I had wronged as well. I closed my eyes, knowing the journey ahead would be challenging. But deep down, I also knew it was the right thing to do. It was time to make peace with the past and, hopefully, find forgiveness in the process. With that thought, I drifted into a restless sleep, ready to take the first step toward healing when morning came. Was I about to make it worse? The next morning, memories flooded back as I prepared to face the ghosts of my past. I found myself reliving a moment from high school, walking down the bustling corridor, surrounded by the chatter and laughter of my classmates. Back then, Jason and I were part of a group that thought we ran the place. We were young, reckless, and often crossed the line without even realizing it. I remembered how we'd pick on others, thinking it was all in good fun. Our friends would laugh, egging us on, making it seem like it was no big deal. I convinced myself it was just harmless teasing and everyone was in on the joke. But looking back now, I wondered if it was as harmless as we thought. A week before graduating, we received our yearbooks. It was supposed to be a time for celebration, but as I flipped through mine, something gnawed at me. Among the usual scribbles of "have a great summer" and "stay cool," there were notes that struck a different chord. Phrases like "thanks for the memories," even if some weren't as fun, and "hope your kinder in the future" stood out. At the time, I brushed them off, but now their meaning hit me hard. Those notes were clues, hints that maybe not everyone found our antics entertaining. It was obvious, yet I'd been blind to it. How had I missed the signs that not everyone was laughing with us? Some were laughing at us, while others were simply enduring our behavior. I started to admit to myself that the harm wasn't as victimless as I'd thought. I imagined the people we targeted, the ones who might have dreaded coming to school because of what we did. The realization was unsettling. My stomach churned with guilt, and I wished I could go back and undo it all. Outside the classroom, I overheard a conversation between two teachers discussing a student's struggles with bullying. One teacher mentioned, "It's often those subtle actions that do the most damage." Their words pierced through me, confirming what I already feared. Our actions, though maybe subtle in our eyes, had left a mark. I couldn't help but wonder, What if those yearbook notes were their way of asking for an apology? Was I too wrapped up in my own world to even notice their cries for help? The thought was uncomfortable, but necessary. As I stood there, I realized I had to do something. Ignoring it was no longer an option. Change was crucial, not just for my peace but for the people I had hurt along the way. I knew I needed to reach out, to apologize and make amends, even if it was years later. It was time to face the consequences of my past actions and do what I could to make things right. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have had the courage to confront your past? The path ahead was unclear, but I knew one thing for sure. It was time to take responsibility and hope that it wasn't too late to heal the wounds I had caused. I met up with Mark at a small coffee shop we used to frequent in college. The place hadn't changed much, still serving the same mediocre coffee and stale pastries. As I sat across from Mark, I could see the years hadn't taken away his carefree smile. We made small talk for a bit, catching up on life. He seemed genuinely happy, a stark contrast to the memories I had been dredging up. Finally, I decided to dive in. Mark, I need to talk about the past, about things I regret. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee. Anna, we were kids back then. We didn't know what we were doing half the time. His casual dismissal stung more than I expected. Yeah, but just because we were young doesn't mean it didn't matter. I hurt people, Mark. I'm trying to make amends, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark shrugged, unbothered. Look, you did some stuff, I did some stuff. We all did. That's what growing up is about. It was as if he was giving me an easy way out, but it didn't sit right. I felt a knot in my stomach, knowing I couldn't just let this go with a shrug. Just then, Ethan, another friend from back in the day, walked in. He spotted us and joined, pulling up a chair. What's the deep discussion about? Ethan asked as he sat down. I took a deep breath, deciding not to sugarcoat it. I'm trying to own up to my past mistakes. Apologize, make things right, if that's even possible. Ethan nodded, his face more serious than Mark's. That's good to hear, Anna. But you know, naming it is the first step. You gotta really face what happened. Mark shook his head, laughing lightly. Come on, Ethan, we were kids. She's being too hard on herself. Ethan didn't let it slide. No, Mark, it's not just kids being kids. Some of it was downright cruel. Anna, recognizing it for what it was is important, but you can't just talk about it. You have to do something. His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I realized that neither Mark's dismissal nor Ethan's blunt acknowledgement would absolve me. They couldn't give me the forgiveness I needed. Only my actions could do that. As I sat there, the coffee shop noise buzzing around us, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was time to stop looking for permission or for someone else to say it was okay. If I wanted to move forward, I had to be the one to take action. I thanked them both and stood up, feeling a small but definite shift inside. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. I left the coffee shop with a clearer idea of what I needed to do next. Was I about to make it worse? Back at home, I opened my laptop, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. The question of whether I should reach out to Sophie had been gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the fear of re-traumatizing her. There was a real possibility that my attempt to apologize could do more harm than good. But how could I know unless I tried? I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind raced with the different scenarios. What if she didn't remember me? Or worse, what if she did and wanted nothing to do with me? I knew the risk, but it felt like something I had to face. I typed her name into LinkedIn, feeling both determined and apprehensive. My heart skipped a beat when her profile appeared. She was living in the same city. This unexpected discovery turned my anxiety up a notch. The thought of potentially running into her now felt a lot more real. I wasn't sure if that was a sign to proceed or to back off entirely. I clicked on her profile, scanning through the details of her career. It was strange seeing how someone's life had progressed parallel to mine, yet so far removed. I hesitated on the connect button, questioning if this was the right approach. Was it too invasive to reach out here, or was it a practical step towards making amends? The decision felt heavier than I had anticipated. The thought of bringing everything to the surface again was daunting. I didn't want to be selfish, seeking my own closure at the expense of her peace. But if I let fear stop me now, I'd never know if reconciliation was possible. As I deliberated, a small part of me hoped I'd find some clue on her profile that would guide my decision. But there was nothing there that could answer my questions. It was all on me. I had to choose whether to stay silent or to risk reopening old wounds. Taking a deep breath, I closed the browser tab, telling myself I'd think it over more. Yet, the anxiety of leaving things unresolved lingered. What would you do if you were in my shoes? I wondered if anyone else had faced such a dilemma, balancing the need to make things right against the possibility of causing further pain. I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. At some point, I'd have to make a choice. For now, I tried to focus on the fact that at least I'd taken a step, even if it was just acknowledging the path ahead. With Sophie in the same city, the potential of crossing paths felt like a ticking clock, pushing me to decide sooner rather than later. As I sat there, I realized that this wasn't just about seeking forgiveness. It was about taking responsibility for my past actions and accepting whatever came next. The clarity I had felt earlier was now clouded with doubt, but I knew I was inching closer to a decision. What would you have done in my place? The therapist's office had a faint scent of lavender, probably from a diffuser hidden somewhere. It was supposed to be calming. Instead, I felt like I was sitting on a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. My therapist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, sat across from me. She listened intently as I rambled on about my dilemma. I just want to get it off my chest, I admitted. But I don't want to make things worse for Sophie. She nodded, understanding my internal tug-of-war. It's important to consider the impact on her, she said. Have you thought about how you could ensure your apology doesn't become another burden for her? I shook my head. That's the problem. I want to apologize, but it feels like adding more to her plate. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on her knees. What about focusing on what you have control over? You can't predict her reaction, but you can control how you approach it. Her words made sense. I had spent so much time worrying about the outcome that I'd forgotten about the process itself. Maybe it was time to draft an apology that was respectful of her boundaries, something that wouldn't catch her off guard or put pressure on her to respond. I pulled out a notepad and pen, relics of an analog world that felt oddly comforting. I started to scribble down thoughts, trying to keep the words honest and straightforward. It was harder than I expected. Every word felt heavy, as if it was soaked with years of history. I think the key is context, I said. I don't want to just spring this on her. Exactly, my therapist replied. Maybe you can reach out in a way that lets her choose if she wants to hear what you have to say. The idea was both simple and profound. I could draft an apology that was contingent on her consent. It would respect her right to remain distant if that was her choice. It felt like the right way forward, a path that balanced my need to make amends with her need for space. As I continued writing, I focused on keeping the message open-ended. I wanted to express my regrets without demanding forgiveness. The pen scratched across the paper, leaving behind fragments of what I hoped would someday be healing words. By the end of the session, I had a draft that felt as close to right as I could manage. It was a small step, but it was something. I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket, realizing that the real challenge would be sticking to this boundaries-first approach. Walking out of the office, I felt lighter yet aware of the weight still to come. The city buzzed with life outside the office windows, a reminder that whatever happened next, life would go on. I just hoped it would be a little better for both of us. Was this the best way to make amends? I wasn't sure, but it felt like a step in the right direction. The community center felt like neutral ground, a place where I could start fresh. I had decided to volunteer for a program that taught conflict resolution. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jason had rolled his eyes when I told him, saying, "So, you're going to be the peacekeeper now?" I shrugged. "I need to do something different, Jason." Inside, the center buzzed with activity. I sat in a circle with a few others, listening to the facilitator explain the importance of respect and being an active bystander. My mind wandered to the times I had failed at both. Would this be just another attempt to look like I was doing the right thing? The thought gnawed at me. During the session, we broke into groups to discuss scenarios. One guy in my group, a bit older with a salt and pepper beard, shared a story about intervening in a heated argument at his workplace. He spoke with conviction, and I found myself inspired. "How did you know what to do?" I asked. He smiled. "You don't always know. It's about deciding to act." His words stuck with me. I realized that respect and action weren't just things you said. They were things you did, even when it was uncomfortable. I thought about my own past reactions, the times I'd been silent when I should have spoken up. Maybe this was my chance to change that. The facilitator asked us to share our commitments. I held my breath and said, "I commit to respecting others and stepping in when I see someone being treated unfairly." Jason's skepticism loomed in my mind. Was I just performing? Yet, as I spoke, something clicked. This was more than an act. It was a choice to be different. The group nodded in support, and in that moment, my guilt felt a little quieter. As the session ended, I lingered, chatting with the salt and pepper guy. You ever feel like you're just playing a part? I asked, half joking. He chuckled. All the time. But the more you act the part, the more it becomes part of you. Walking out of the center, I felt a shift. The path, once cluttered with doubt and regret, now seemed clearer. I had a code to follow: respect and action. It wouldn't erase the past, but it could shape the future. I knew it was just the beginning, but for the first time, it felt like I was building something real. Heading home, I wondered how Jason would react to this change. Would he see it as genuine? I hoped so. Either way, I was ready to prove it, not just to him, but to myself. What would you have done? Epilogue. After everything that happened, Jason and I had a long discussion about boundaries. He was firm about not contacting anyone unsolicited, believing that if they wanted to talk, they knew where to find him. I understood his perspective, but felt a need for closure for myself and others involved. Despite my frustration, I respected his approach of giving people space to reach out on their own terms. Weeks passed in silence from our former friends, and I struggled with the urge to reach out. I remembered Jason's words about trusting time to heal wounds. Eventually, one friend did reach out, asking to talk. I showed the message to Jason, who reminded me to be honest yet kind, emphasizing that it was about understanding rather than winning an argument. Our conversation was awkward but ultimately productive, leading to apologies and a commitment to better communication moving forward. This experience taught me the value of patience and the importance of giving people the space they need. Jason's boundaries-first approach wasn't a refusal to engage. It ensured that when we did connect, it was genuine. I realized that waiting for the right moment can lead to more meaningful conversations. Together, we found a balance between his boundaries and my need for resolution, slowly rebuilding the connections that had once felt strained.